Hello, my name is Annette with Sunbeam FPP and Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today's video, I'm putting together my American Woodcock foundation paper piecing. I got a request on my Etsy shop for this particular bird. I'm rating this pattern as intermediate. It does have a few small pieces. I like to test all my foundation paper piece patterns before I put them on Etsy. I also take a look at the colors I'm going to need, make a little list, and grab some fabric from my stash that I think might work. For this cute little bird, I've got a flesh-colored fabric for the bill and the feet. I've got a dark brown, a medium brown, and a light beige. I grabbed a dark blue for the sky because the most times I've seen this particular bird has been at dusk when it's getting dark outside. I grabbed a pretty green for the grass and one little black scrap triangle for the eyes. To start with, I'm going to cut out this section D. It's got just a few pieces, but I kind of want to show you how I start cutting out my fabric. Half of this bird's eye is on one section and the other half is on the other. So section D does have half of the eye. So I've got my little piece of triangle there. That's all I really need for that little piece of eye, D1. Then D2 and 3 and 4 and 7 are all the same shade. D5 is the dark brown and D6 is the blue. The important thing to remember when you're cutting out your pieces for your sections, when you have your pattern facing up where you can see the numbers and the letters, your fabric that you're trying to match should be wrong side up. Now in pieces this small for my little section D, it's not a huge deal. And for fabrics like batiks that are the same on both sides, also not a huge deal. Solids that are not printed, also not a huge deal. But this fabric is beige on one side and you can tell it's just printed on the one side. So I really do need to cut these out to size with the wrong side of the fabric facing up. Next, you'll see I'm cutting out a piece of the medium brown, and I'm making sure it is right side up and making sure it's going to cover that piece on the section. And I did go ahead and cut out a strip of this fabric. I know I'm going to need more of it, so I'm just cutting out a strip that is about the width I'm going to need, and I'll be able to cut smaller pieces from that scrap. With all the pieces for section D cut out, I like to put them in number order and put the little piece of paper right on top, and I start a stack of my sections that are ready to sew. I like to go through the whole pattern. I cut apart every piece and go ahead and cut out each piece of fabric I need for each section and get that whole stack done before I start sewing. Around this point in my journey, I came across this piece. I went over to the computer because I saw that A2 piece, which by the way, the numbering does get fixed on the finished pattern. That numbering is way off. Anyway, I saw there was a grayish beige and a light beige. So I have two different light colors, and I needed to go back through the first few I did and fix that. I found this fat quarter in my stash that I thought would look perfect for that light grayish color. I went back through all the pattern pieces and went ahead and numbered them. That F is for the flesh color. Then I used G for that grayish beige. I used LB for light beige, medium, MB for medium brown, and DB for dark brown. I went back for the sections I had already cut out and replaced that gray where I needed to. When I first started paper piecing, I think the angles were the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around. On this piece D7, let me show you how I kind of lined that up. I folded the fabric down. Now I've got it wrong side up, but I'm folding it down right on that angle line, making sure I've got plenty of overlap there. So I'm making a little crease there, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut that right on the line that I folded. I know I've got extra for seam allowance on the left side there. So that is going to work out for my D section where that angle piece will get on there correctly. I don't know how EQ8 numbered this way. This was crazy, but I did fix it and the finished pattern is correct. This pattern has two sections that overlap 2 pages. I'll show you how I like to do that. EQ8 does print a joining line on my pattern, so that's nice. I cut a little zigzag or a serpentine line, kind of just getting it on both sides of the joining line. Put some tape on that, and then I match up the 2 lines overlapping. I can line up the cut line and the sew line on the pattern itself, and it all works out. Once I have my stack of sections ready to go, I do go ahead and fold up my fabrics that I had pulled from my stash and get those put away. Once I have my stack of sections ready to sew, I get my little works area set up. I've got my smaller pressing mat and my iron plugged in, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to take you through slow speed on this B section. Piece 1 is that light gray, and piece 2 is the dark brown. Now, another hard thing to wrap your head around is that the back of the paper pattern is the right side of the fabric. So I've got my dark brown together with my gray, right sides together. I'm putting my pieces together. I want the edge to overlap that stitch line between B1 and B2. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this with a 1.3 stitch length. I try to stitch about 2 to 3 stitches before that stitch line and about 2 to 3 stitches after that stitch line. Next, I'm going to fold my paper on that line I just stitched. I will trim away the excess bulk, and I will press piece 2 away from piece 1. So in this case, that is the gray that's going to be pressed away from the dark brown. Piece 3 is that little scrap of black that I cut out for the eye. Actually, it's only half of the eye. So we want to place this on the back of our paper pattern. You can see that dark brown and that gray are right side up if you're looking at the back of the pattern. So I want to make sure that my black triangle overlaps that stitch line, cutting away even with that stitch line makes it a little bit easier to see where this piece is going to go. With light fabrics, it's not a huge issue because you can see right through the paper, but when you get to those darker fabrics, boy, that can really become a problem. Again, I am trimming away the excess bulk from that seam. Then I go to the pressing mat. I fold open that piece 3 away from piece 1 and 2 and press that. Remember, when you're pressing, use a dry iron until your block is completely finished and the paper has been removed. We're ready for piece 4, which is one of those light gray fabrics. I'm placing that right sides together with the units on the back, making sure I'm overlapping with at least a 1/4 inch that stitch line between pieces 1, 2, and 3, and the new piece I'm adding 4. Once that is stitched, I will trim away the excess bulk from the seam, take it to the iron, and press piece 4 away from pieces 1, 2, and 3. Next, it's time to add piece 5. I'm going to put that right sides together with the back of these units. I'm going to make sure I've got overlapping 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to stitch that line between 1, 2, 3, and 4 and the new addition of piece 5. Next, I'll trim away that excess bulk. I will take this to the iron and I will press piece 5 open away from the other pieces. I'm going to speed this up to double time for pieces 6 through 10. Piece 6 is dark brown, and then 7, 8, 9, and 10 are blue. One thing you'll note right here, I stitched a little bit long when I added piece 5, B5, so when I folded it back, I had to kind of tear a little bit to get the paper to fold back on the seam that I had just stitched. That's normal. Piece 10 was a little tricky. I went ahead and folded on that seam line when I knew that everything was covered up, and then I trimmed the sides of this section. That is going to make it much easier for me to align my piece when I add it to the back. I'm cutting straight across where that pressed line that I made is. That way I can see exactly where my seam allowance will be. And folding back, it's centered perfectly, so when I stitch that line, I should fold this open and it should cover the section piece 10. Sometimes I check before I press, but in this case I was pretty confident, so after I trimmed away the bulk, I went ahead and pressed open that piece 10, and it did come out just right. I did want to touch on the waste of foundation paper piecing. Fabric is very expensive these days, so if you can use up your scraps to do foundation paper piecing, they're already scraps, that's a great thing to do with them. But even the scraps from my paper piecing, I am saving anything that's larger than an inch. I will put that in my crumb pile, and then I just have a few little shavings to either throw in the trash or find some other use for. Once I finish stitching all the sections, it's time to start trimming. Now, I have 2 sections in this pattern that have just 1 piece of fabric. What I like to do before I trim those is put a little Scotch tape around the edge. I will get out my cutting mat here and my rotary cutter and a ruler, My ruler that I'm using here is 2.5 inches wide by 12.5 inches long. That works for just about all of this pattern. I want to cut on the dotted line. The solid line is my stitch line, so I am going to go around this pattern and line up my ruler on that stitch line on the 1/4 inch on my ruler, and then the cutting on the edge will be right on that dotted line. There is a little ruler called add a quarter. I don't use that. I just use the markings on my ruler. Many of these pattern pieces will have little notches on the end that do need to be trimmed away, and I usually just eyeball that with my rotary cutter, trying to get right on that dotted line. I will speed along here. If you see me using my scissors to trim a piece, I do that sometimes if the piece is very small. It's easy just to hold it in my hand and trim it with scissors. As I mentioned, I'm testing this pattern before I put it on my Etsy shop. So I've got my corrections on piece A there, and I've got the order that I need to stitch these pieces together. What I like to do is flip these pieces over with the print side up and lay them out, get them all together, kind of like putting a puzzle together. This is a lot easier to do. If you print out all 6 pages of the pattern, you will see the picture of the bird, and it's a lot easier to lay out these pieces looking at that actual picture. This pattern goes together pretty easily though, in my opinion. That's why I call it an intermediate pattern. There are 2 sides. There's a left side of the pattern, or a left side of the block, and a right side of the block. I drew a diagonal line across the picture at an appropriate point and then subdivided those 2 halves of the block. So I've got a left and I've got a right. Once you put the left together and then you put the right together, then you just have to sew one more seam to join those 2. The right side has 2 different sections that feature half of the eyeball. That makes it easy to match at least those 2 up. With everything laid out, I am just going to follow my instructions, and I put those really close to where I'm sewing so I can keep an eye on that. And I'm going to take the first 2 sections, place them right sides together, and stitch using a 1.3 stitch length right on that stitch line. Now these are going to go right sides together. The fabric is right sides together, so I can see my pattern pieces and I can see right where to stitch. I like to use clips when I'm putting these pieces together to make sure that anything that needs to line up does match, and also the straight edges that are formed actually stay straight. Now, regarding removing the paper, some people leave the paper on until they're completely done with the block. I tend to remove anything that's going to get caught up in a 3rd seam and I can't get to it. And in fact, in this block, I just removed the paper from each new section that I added. A good reason to leave the paper on, I'll just be honest and upfront, is because you're cutting these pieces out on crazy angles. There is going to be lots of stretch in this fabric because it's not cut on the grain anymore. It's cut at angles, and wild angles at that. So some of these pieces will have 2 or 3 angles all the way around the block. Keeping the paper on keeps it from stretching. Now, of course, on this first piece, I'm trying to show you I did not like the way that lined up. So I've got this tiny, tiny 1.3 stitch length. It is very, very difficult to rip those stitches out. So be careful the first time. Decide ahead of time how much leeway you will allow yourself. Do you want perfection? Is it okay if it's off 1/8 of an inch or a couple of millimeters? I'm usually pretty flexible. I give myself lots and lots of leeway, but this was an easy fix. I only had to rip out just a little bit of the seam, adjust the fabric, scoot it over a little bit, and then it came out just right. Here is a look at the left half of this block. It's looking pretty good so far. You might notice I've got my seam ripper handy, but I also have my long, skinny tweezers handy. Those come in handy when removing pieces of paper from the back. I'll slow this next bit down just a little bit. I'm putting the left and the right together and going ahead and clipping that seam, making sure it's lined up correctly. There's a place where the head meets the back of the bird, and I do want that to be just right. So I clipped, took it apart, reclipped, took it apart, reclipped. I think I did that about 3 times before I stitched the seam. Now we get to my favorite part, which is pressing the block. And I just wanted to take my ruler here too to show you. This is a finished 12-inch by 12-inch block pattern. So I'm taking my ruler and I can see it's a 12.5-inch ruler. So this came out just right at about 12.5 inches unfinished. Now that all the paper is gone and the block is put together, if you would like to use steam with your iron or a starch spray or anything like that, now is the time to do that. I still kept using a dry iron. I didn't really need steam for this. Again, during this pressing process, I am being very careful not to stretch anything. I'm trying to be very gentle with my iron and not pull anything out of alignment. This little bird turned out so cute. These birds are adorable. They have a very cool display during mating season, which is amazing. So put a Google out there if you want to find out more about this neat bird. I will make sure and leave in the description a link to my Etsy shop to this particular pattern, and I've got cars and birds and teapots on my Etsy shop. I do a lot of different foundation paper piece patterns. If you've got something you'd like to see, reach out to me on my Etsy shop and I will let you know if I think I can do that. This American woodcock bird was requested by an Etsy user. I invite you to like, comment, subscribe to this channel or my other channel, Sunbeam Fabric Art. That helps me grow this content. I thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you back again real soon.